I want to talk a little bit about how to get the most out of your hearing aids. And I'm going to use my personal experiences to illustrate some of what I think are the key points. To do that, I need to tell you a little bit about my history. So I've had no hearing in my left ear for the last 25 to 26 years. And the hearing loss in my right ear would be defined as severe to profound, which basically means that unless the sound is very loud, I can't actually hear it. And even there, I only hear it at muffled sort of volumes. Around February 2017, I had a cochlear implant done to my left ear. So I basically needed to teach myself how to hear from that ear again. And the way I did that was firstly focusing on just very simple sounds such as the doorbell ringing, the microwave beeping, indicators in the car, clock ticking up on the wall. And the first time I heard some of those sounds, I didn't quite know what I was hearing and I needed to look around and try to find out what the source of the sound was. But the moment I made that connection, it was then suddenly easier to actually identify those sounds in future if I ever heard them again. So it was really a case there of practice and perseverance to try to be able to get a grasp of what I was hearing there. Obviously, understanding speech is a lot more difficult than being able to hear the sound of a doorbell. So what I did there was I tried to make the activity as enjoyable for me as I possibly could to take some of the chore out of the fact that I was doing hearing rehabilitation. So what I did there was take my all-time favourite novel, which is Stephen King's It. I've read the book somewhere in the vicinity of 20 or 30 times. And it is quite a big, thick book, so that's quite an achievement in itself. Yay for me! So I got an audio book version of this novel, and also a printed version which I loaded onto my Kindle reader. And I would listen to the audiobook version through the implant alone. So I actually had the hearing aid turned off. I didn't want my better ear to cheat. And while I was listening to the dialogue through the implant, I was following along with the printed text in my ebook reader. And it was hard. I mean, at first it was hard. What I was hearing seemed, meaningless. There was absolutely no connection between the printed version and what I was actually hearing. Occasionally I'd pick up on a word here or there. In the first couple of chapters, I think one of the main characters' name is Bill, which is a nice, short, easy name. So I remember picking up on that name, early on. But it was really, again, just a case of, practice and perseverance. Following along with the text helped a lot because it gave me a context of what I was supposed to be hearing, which then made it a lot easier to then recognise, okay, well, that's what that sound actually was. And just through, listening to, page after page after page of dialogue, the connections became easier and easier. So where I would, previously, understand maybe one word then followed on into two words, and then I'd be able to understand a sentence, and then I worked my way up to understanding a paragraph, and then it got to a point that I could understand maybe a page or two of text, just listening to the dialogue alone and not having to refer to the printed copy. And if I did get lost, I would refer back to the printed version of the book to get myself back on track again. And over time, I found that I was able to lengthen the periods that I could look away from the printed version and listen only via what I was hearing through the implant. The other thing I did was practice listening to the voice that I would be most familiar with, which was my own. So when I was leading up to having the cochlear implant surgery and definitely afterwards, I kept a YouTube journal documenting, my experiences up until that point. And what I would do is after I'd made the video, later on in the day, I would actually watch it back again and listen to myself talking. So being able to see, obviously, my lips move in the video made it a lot easier. And again, it was really the case of making that connection between what I expected to hear and what I did actually hear. And at first, again, it was a bit of a challenge because it was almost like there was this language that I knew I was hearing and I couldn't quite get a grasp of, the actual, the sharpness of the words and being able to get clarity of the words. But again, just through perseverance, I found that, it became easier and easier. The other thing I did was once I then had to return back to work, was utilising the time that I spent on the train going to and from work to practice listening to speech in what would be more of a challenging situation. So again, I will turn the hearing aid off, basically close my eyes and just listen to the sounds around me just through the cochlear implant alone. And more or less try to eavesdrop in on conversations that were happening around me. Now that was a bit of a challenge again, because not only was there, the conversation I was trying to make sense of, but there were also other conversations happening at the same time, and there was the sound of the train and the sound of the doors opening and people moving past. So that was more of a challenge. But again, same message: persistence, perseverance, and certainly a lot of patience paid off over time. And I got to the point that the level of speech understanding on my left from my left ear is actually at a point that it's certainly very beneficial, and it picks up a lot of what I'm missing through the right ear. So how can you use these sort of techniques with your hearing aids? Because obviously hearing aids work very differently than cochlear implants. And I guess the same message is there. It's really just a case of, listen, practice hearing those simple sounds first. So if you've never worn hearing aids before and you've just been fitted with them, chances are your hearing loss has been there for quite a period of time. And that's the sneaky thing about hearing loss, is that it does literally sneak up on you. So by the time you actually notice, or somebody tells you that you're not hearing so well, your hearing loss may have actually been there for the last, 5 or sometimes even 10 years. So you've had this, progressively, deteriorating hearing over that period of time, and all of a sudden you pop hearing aids in, and it's a little bit like you've been sitting in a dark room for all that period, and somebody shines a flashlight in your eyes. It's bright, and at first impressions, it's going to seem like you're staring, directly into the sun. But as you get used to the intensity of that light, you realise, hey, look, it's just a regular old flashlight. And that's exactly what you need to do when wearing hearing aids. So at first, it will seem like you've got superhuman hearing, and, you're picking up on, the sound of you scratching your head and your feet, your shoes, as you're walking, the sound of, taps dripping, all those sounds there. And at first, that can seem like it's overwhelming. But I like to think that the brain is, at this point, a little bit confused because it's hearing all these sounds that it hasn't heard for quite some time. And it's almost like it needs to mentally file all these everyday sounds away in a little cabinet in your brain that it calls needless background noise. So sounds that you do want to hear them, but you don't want the brain to react to them in the same way that it would if it heard the sound of, a glass breaking, or, a car, honking its horn, or, somebody screaming. So that takes time, and it's really just a case of just, using the hearing aids at the times when you're less under pressure to actually try to understand what somebody's saying. So a lot of times people tell me that they only wear their hearing aids when they're going out or when they're going to work in those really challenging situations, and I don't really wear them at home because I think, well, I don't really need to worry about, understanding what people are saying, so I give myself a break. I tend to think that wearing, certainly, in the initial stages, wearing the hearing aids when you are at home and you're not under pressure to understand what, people are saying to you, is the best time, because it's giving yourself time to acclimatise to what everyday sounds sound like, what your voice sounds like through the hearing aid, what the sound of you turning pages sounds like through the hearing aid, what the sound of, your feet on, the tiles in your house sound like. If you can get used to those sounds now, later when you get into these more challenging situations, all those sounds that would, otherwise distract you aren't going to do so, and you can then focus on hearing what you want to hear. The other thing to keep in mind is that hearing aids are just that. I mean, the name in itself implies exactly what they are. They are hearing aids. They're not hearing cures. There is no cure for hearing loss at this point. Hearing aids certainly do not cure hearing loss. They won't give you back the hearing that you had when you were, say, 20 or so years old. So what you really need to use there is the other tools which are at your disposal, which, believe it or not, are basic communication skills. And some of the things that I know when I was growing up were instilled to me as being, parts of just common courtesy, facing a person while you're speaking, don't look away, don't talk into your hand, that sort of thing. Because being able to get those visual cues when you're speaking to people can then help for you to pick up on the things that you may not necessarily be able to through your hearing alone. So certainly people need to be facing you directly. If they need to get your attention rather than calling you from another room, it's going to help a great deal if they can actually get your attention via some other way. So whether it be that they actually make visual contact with you so you can actually see them, or a tap on the shoulder if you're not directly facing them, something so then you know that somebody is trying to get your attention, and then you can focus on them and things are going to be a lot easier. And you really need to speak up as well. If somebody's doing something that makes it hard for you, you need to let them know, because you can't expect people to understand what it's like to have a hearing loss unless you give them that understanding. The other key thing I really think that you need to do is get an understanding of just the basics of how your hearing aids work. So a lot of hearing aids have a little, whether it might be a volume dial or a volume switch or something similar, and to understand the situations when it's actually beneficial for you to maybe crank the volume up a little bit, or alternatively, the situations when it might be beneficial for you to actually lower the volume a little bit. Raising the volume isn't going to help you hear one person speaking in a noisy environment, and that's the type of thing that you need to basically learn just by experimenting. So if you are in a situation that you find difficult, try adjusting the volume to see if that makes any difference. Sometimes you might actually find that simply you altering your position, so trying to put the sound that you don't want to hear behind you, for example, and limiting the amount of sound that you do want to hear to in front of you is going to make more of a difference than trying to fiddle around with a volume switch. The other thing that you may need to look into is if there are specialised programs within your hearing aids. So some programs have hearing aids which are designed for listening to music. Some hearing aids have programs which are designed for listening to speech in a noisy environment. Some hearing aids, or most hearing aids actually, have a program in there called telecoil. Now, telecoil can be useful for if you're, in your place of worship, or at a train station or an airport, or if you're in a cinema or a theatre watching a show, there's certain designated areas where they have a loop installed, and that loop basically, in a very simplistic way of putting it, that loop basically enables your hearing aid to act as a remote speaker for the venue that you're actually at. So you'll actually get what's called a better signal to noise ratio, so signal being what you want to hear, noise being what you don't want to hear. So being able to get more of that sound that you want to hear is just going to mean that you're going to understand it better. And all that really just comes down to just understanding the basics of how your hearing aid works, and what situations hearing aids can give you a lot of benefit, in what situations hearing aids can give you not maybe as much benefit, and you may then need to, employ some other methods of trying to understand better. So if you have, for example, your favourite restaurant that you like to go to, and it gets really crowded and there's a lot of noise there, and you find you don't like to go there anymore because you can't understand, what you may perhaps need to do is, go perhaps a little bit earlier in the day when it's not so crowded. Maybe see whether there's a seat which is in a section of the restaurant which is not as noisy. Perhaps there might be a seat which is better well lit, which makes it easier for you to lip read the person that you're dining with and pick up other visual cues. So don't rely solely upon the hearing aids. The hearing aids are just a tool. They're certainly not going to be the the be-all that ends-all cure for hearing loss, because that's just not the way it works. One way to look at it is somebody who, for example, has mobility problems. Maybe they've had an accident, they need to walk with a walking stick. The walking stick is there. It will certainly help them walk. It will make it a bit easier for them to walk, but it's not going to give them the same ability back in their legs that they had before they needed the walking stick. In the same way, somebody who was walking with a walking stick and had the choice between taking, a long flight of steps or an elevator, is obviously going to choose the elevator, because they physically, although they could probably negotiate those steps given time, it's actually more of a challenge for them. And the easier solution for them is actually then to take the lift. And you need to think of the same thing with your hearing as well. So if there's a situation that is going to be a challenge for you, you need to try to find a way to make that easier. So that's all I've got for you today in terms of how to make the most of your hearing aids. I hope you found this information useful. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so please leave me a comment.